Hello, I'm Craig Constantine. Today I'm talking to Denise Allen. Welcome, Denise.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. We did a little conversation beforehand, as I always do. And I mean, we could talk about podcasting, we could talk about Pennsylvania, we could talk about, then I think I'm more interested in genealogy because, well, partly because I've had this side project thought about making a podcast where I just go around to all the state historians at their state capitals and like hole up in a hotel room nearby and then just do a bunch of long form interviews with the state historian who would just like nerd out about all the things that they probably would love to talk about. But anyway, adjacent to that is the idea of, so we're in Pennsylvania and you and I were talking about how the records are spread out. And I was reading a blog post you had about there's like a 105-year, rolling window before the records can even be made publicly available. And I guess I'm interested in, you mentioned to me the idea about how history gets written and even how genealogical research is done and how it's, I don't want to say it's done like from the professional point of view because individual people do it professionally as well. But I'm wondering how you see the difference between, maybe we call it like grassroots versus top down type of research and historical work or research for genealogical work. Oh, it's going to be one of these episodes. So, what do you think is the big difference between somebody who's doing, as you are, research professionally but individually versus maybe somebody who's doing it like at a graduate school? Like, what are the big things that they do differently or that you do differently from how they would do it?
Yeah, this is something I thought a lot about. So, one of the things I've been thinking about is how much genealogy is like a micro history. So, you're really looking at not just the family and what people used to call the pedigree, like where you came from,
Right.
but also you're looking around often in the town that the people lived in and the county that they lived in and who their friends were, where they went to church, what they did for work, who they married and all that. So oftentimes, particularly the further you go back in time, we don't have as many records on people. They didn't have to have a driver's license. They didn't have a birth certificate issued when they were born.
Yeah,
Many
you mentioned
people
that they
were,
didn't have any assets, they didn't have a will, so it's
yeah,
like
they
man didn't
were
even know when they
landless.
died.
They worked as servants. They worked as indentured labor, and yeah, so for folks like that, you need to put them in a community of people. And a historian often is looking at the records of people that are wealthy and famous and own things and trying to tell the tale of those folks. That has, well, the other part with an historian too is who's telling the broader history is, they want to tell a narrative about what it means to be in that time period. What the zeitgeist was is another great word.
Mhm.
Whereas a genealogist, you're really trying at this day and age to really deal with the facts as you see them. I mean, there's definitely genealogy that's been done where people get swept up in the narrative like a historian would, and want to be related to a Mayflower, person
Right.
or a Revolutionary
Third cousin to
War
George, right?
officer or something. But for me personally, I pursue the stories of just everyday folks, everyday people that lived in a particular time and place. I find them fascinating. If I can find a court case that they were involved in, or some details in a will or a land deed, it's or maybe a business ledger where the store that they shopped at and what they bought, yeah, at the corner store. I find stuff like that very, very, very interesting.
Have you ever had any success or have you ever tried to compare that type of, we'll call those microhistories to use your word. Have you ever tried to compare those microhistories like regionally? Like, um, Western Maryland versus Eastern Maryland are two very different places, right? And like West Virginia is kind of like a little bit like Pittsburgh around, but it's very different from the far eastern ends of Pennsylvania. So have you ever tried to just take like one microhistory or maybe one family's microhistory and work with another genealogist and to try and draw some societal comparisons like using those microhistories? Because like that's done on the big scale. Oh, here's my the Northern Irish immigrants to the U.S. They do these giant histories, and then they compare it to like the migrant happening in a different at like big scales. I'm wondering if you've done it at the small scale.
Yeah, I have not, but there's local historical societies in every county in Pennsylvania where people have picked up that charge and done it, where they've tried to tell the tale of the various ethnic groups, racial groups, religious groups that have come into that area and why they came, what they were doing, who they married, what foods they ate.
Right.
They'll tell the whole thing. Um, and we were talking about that, my peers and I, the other day of, who wouldn't love a little clickable Google map of all the available people researching in one particular town right now? Like, that would be great. Like, are you researching in Pittsburgh? Me too. Which family? Me too. I think it would be fun. People do collaborate. In every county of Pennsylvania, there's volunteers that run Facebook groups. And if you go onto these Facebook groups, they do two things which are outstanding. One, they ban any other conversation other than genealogy. You can't talk about anything other than
right.
genealogy.
Yeah.
And two, people just really geeking out on local history. So they're sharing local photos of the town from their personal collection, who was there. People will come on and ask like, oh, I'm looking for so-and-so. And somebody will say, oh, I'm like your third or fourth cousin. Hi. And, people make all kinds of connections on there. So those virtual spaces have been wonderful, particularly in our more rural counties. There's not one for Philadelphia, though. No one, no one has taken up the charge to do Philadelphia, but for the rest of Pennsylvania's 67 counties, there's a local groups where people can really connect. It's fun.
I'm fascinated by the scale. So I haven't been to all 50 states, but I've been to probably more than half of the states in the U.S. plus countries overseas. And Pennsylvania's different. Like,
We are.
well, first of all, it's wide, right? I mean, like Texas is enormous. Okay, Texas, you win. But Pennsylvania is just like a sea of woodlands. I mean, for people who haven't ever been here, maybe they picture a city like Allentown, or maybe they picture Erie on a lake, but they picture like developed. They picture Pittsburgh or Philadelphia or Harrisburg. I'm like, no, mostly you can't get here. You can't get there from here. You have to go like to the left down the valley, and then you can either go around where the creek cut through, and it gets all because the Appalachians run through and slice us diagonally. Everything is divided into valleys. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are the counties really very much alike? In other words, you go to, northern Luzerne and it's completely different from Lehigh. Like, what is it about the county boundaries? Do they follow, I know some of them follow geography, but like for people who have no clue at all, do they follow geography? Do they follow culture? Do they follow religious boundaries? Like why do we have 67 counties and
What
how are they
happened?
divided? Well, I don't know about what happened. That's probably a tall order, but what really happens at the line when you go from one to the other?
Yeah. So you're right about Pennsylvania and that kind of the ridges that go across, from the northeast down to the southwest of the state really affected how the state was developed. People don't realize that when people came over from Europe and colonized the southeastern corner, they then went south to Maryland and Virginia and then back up to get to Pittsburgh. That was easier than going straight across. So
it's still hard. How many tunnels are there on the turnpike to drive west?
Yeah, all the tunnels and bridges. Yeah, they didn't do those. So, and then the northern half, the top half of the state was really settled by people from Connecticut. It was, in fact, disputed with Connecticut for a long time until just after the state constitution was signed.
And
in
for
the
people who are bad at
1780s.
geography like me, we don't normally touch Connecticut. Connecticut is
We don't
not
normally
adjacent to
touch Connecticut,
Pennsylvania.
no, but Connecticut had a claim on the top half of the state, and there was actual wars fought. Like, people shot each other for like 50 years over land in it was called the Pennamite Wars, during this late 1600s, early 1700s. So the county lines are partly geographic for the most part. You can see this because they're very curvy.
Yeah,
And
that's a
people from the
river. Like,
Midwest, yeah, people from the Midwest that look at Pennsylvania county lines, they're like, "What are you? What? Why?"
when they look at our road maps, they're like,
Yeah,
"What are you? Yeah, come here."
yeah. Yeah, someone from like Iowa's like, you do lines and straight, you don't make them crooked.
Yes.
What is your problem? And they're following creeks and mountains and things like that. Some of the lines in the northwestern part of the state are a little straighter. But yeah, during the 1800s, counties got chopped up into smaller and smaller bits, and a lot of it was political. You know, someone influential would go to the state legislature and petition to have a new county formed. They'd say, you know, I have enough people, or the existing population, because of resources, what they were trying to do at the time, whether it was mining or farming or forestry, they would have a population that would be too far from the courthouse, because all your business was conducted
Right.
through the courthouse. So they would say, hey, can we form a new county over here? And most of the time the state would say yes. And then they got to pick the county name, and then you could look at each county for how they named the county. But yeah, that's essentially how the counties were formed. There was no
No central
future.
planning.
Yeah, no future planning. There wasn't a 100-year plan or anything like that.
I think that's an interesting point. I hadn't really thought about how, and I'm thinking Pennsylvania was settled from east westward in like a watercolor wash of
Mm-hmm.
waves of different, here come the Italians, here come the Irish, here come the German.
Mm-hmm.
But I hadn't really thought about how that would make much more sense for it to have washed in from the different sides, like from different directions, because it is much easier to enter Pennsylvania from Maryland or from West
Yeah,
Virginia.
yeah, yeah. If you've
So,
made the drive, and
yeah.
yeah. And I do have to make a plug for Pennsylvania's county courthouses, because those were built in the 1800s, almost universally. Some counties ripped theirs down and rebuilt them
Hmm.
at a later time, but they're beautiful. So if you really want to geek out, you could drive to every Pennsylvania county courthouse, because they're just adorable and they're all unique.
Do you have an idea roughly how far, like the average dimension of a county? Like my brain's thinking the county that I'm in is got to be 30 to 40 miles across. Like Lehigh County is not a particularly large county, but it's a it's a big chunk of land. And when you made the point about county courthouses, I happen to live not that far from the county courthouse, but I'm like, yeah, where's the next one, Craig? Like like you're doing like the centers and the jigsaw puzzles, or the centers of the population areas in those jigsaw puzzles. And yeah, if you had a horse and buggy, or you didn't have a buggy and you just had to walk, that would be a long way to go to like Carbon County's courthouse or Bucks County's courthouse.
Yeah, like a person could walk like 10 miles easily in a day, like back and forth, right? So you wouldn't, and if you travel by horse, you would do, 12 to 20. So that amount of distance from the courthouse was far enough for most people, right? So if you think about it like that, yeah,
Yeah. And then
30 to 40 miles across is about right,
now
right?
you're not
Like,
gonna go there, conduct your business, and then come right back. You need to
no,
like
you'd
go
stay
there
with
and do.
friends, or yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
you'd
Well,
figure it
now
out. Yeah.
I'm also wondering. Let's just geek out about Pennsylvania history.
Sure.
So there, where I grew up in tangent. Is every square inch of Pennsylvania in a county, or do we have any wacky geography where we have pieces of land that aren't in counties?
Yeah, we do, and you know where the wacky is. I mean, in Pennsylvania, that's Philadelphia. So
I was going to say, we want to talk about that little triangle, the
yeah,
little Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland geometry. Oops.
yeah, yeah.
Is that actually the weird part?
For people that don't know, people in Pennsylvania love to tease Philadelphia. It's always like the outlier. I guess people that live around Philadelphia think of themselves as being
Yeah, they
part
wish they
of
were in Philly,
Philly.
but they can't
Yeah.
afford it, right?
Yeah. But as
I
soon as
always
you
make a
get,
joke that it's Pennsatucky. Pennsylvania is Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and the rest of it's Alabama.
I hate that joke. I really hate that joke. Can I just tell you? It's just so mean because the people that they call Pennsyltucky are the people that provide all the
Actually make all the
food,
things, all the
all the
food,
food,
all
all
the
the
coal.
natural resources, all the, I mean, they're the, there's like hardly any crime in the part that they call Pennsyltucky,
Mm,
they provide most of the tax base, for the state.
that's a good
It's just
point.
like, it's crazy. And they keep calling it, and I'm like, that's the majority of the state.
Clearly, I've hit
The
a
state is
nerve.
13 million people.
That was
And,
my other question: is how big is it? Yeah.
yeah, it's 13 million people, and 10 and a half of them live in like rural to suburban areas.
Mm.
Most of it is not urban.
That was the
It's
other
very
thing I was asking.
frustrating. I
All
always
right,
want to
note to
defend.
self: I'll stop
I
saying
will come
Pennsatucky
down and defend the everyday person over every time.
in, in my defense, I didn't grow up in the urban areas.
Yeah,
So yeah, it's a pot calling the kettle black.
you,
Um,
you wanted to
what?
geek out on Pennsylvania history.
Um, yeah,
You
and
want?
that led me to ask about the any parts of it that aren't in counties. Um, yeah, my brain's just going like, I have like Harrisburg is why is Harrisburg over there? It's because it's kind of in the middle, but our state legislature and our state Senate, like it's a long way to go. I mean, even today, like if
Hmm.
we want to go to it's not the Allegheny Forest. What's the forest? There's a national forest north, kind
Like
of
bald
almost to
eagle?
Pittsburgh. Yeah,
Oh,
Bald Eagle's up there, but almost to Pittsburgh. There's a big,
yeah,
nice national forest whose name escapes me. And it's a drive. It takes you like 6 hours to get there by car from where I am because you got to go the wrong way and then you got to go the other
yep.
wrong way. You got to go around. And there's just so much space. Um, has anybody ever tried to subdivide? Like, have we ever had discussions since William Penn about maybe we just cut this thing diagonally over here and the left half can be West Pennsylvania and Pennsylvania to the east?
Well, I think the way things are going in the 2020s, we might be able to split this up due to political lines. I don't know. I mean, um, states splitting. I guess the last one was Virginia when it split into West Virginia and Virginia for the Civil War, right?
Hmm.
And West Virginia went to the Union, and Virginia went to the Confederacy. So it's not like it hasn't been done in the history of the United States, but I don't. Hey, anything goes these days. We're making history every day. So let's see.
Yeah.
Did you know
How
that
many? Go ahead.
When Pennsylvania was founded, William Penn thought it was the end times?
No, I didn't know that. I
Yeah,
did.
William Penn was a Quaker, and he took as um, kind of he felt like at the time we were heading towards the end. It was the apocalypse, and we were heading towards the period of Revelation. And I'm like, wow, William Penn,
Off by a little bit. What did
if
he make?
only
Did he
if
make
only you could
particular
be alive
decisions?
now.
I don't think that would work. I would just be like culture shock. But were there particular decisions that you think he made? That like how did you discover that, and what makes you say that he was thinking that way? Or do
Oh,
we want to
it was
unpack?
in it was in his personal writings and everything. And it maybe it influenced his decision for people to be a little more free here than they were in some of the other colonies. So,
Hmm.
William Penn was an Englishman, and he had lived in Ireland. He was a Quaker. We all know that. And there were a lot of English colonies that were founded, along the eastern seaboard. But Pennsylvania was unique in that we allowed anyone to practice any religion here from the get-go. So there were over 20 religions in Pennsylvania right from the beginning, whereas Maryland to the south was a Catholic colony, and New Jersey to the east was pretty much Episcopalians. So and New York was the Dutch, right? The Dutch Reformed, mostly, although also very cosmopolitan and very focused on economics from the very beginning.
Right.
Good old New York. But Pennsylvania was seen as a haven. So we had a lot of people that came here that were very kind of mystical followers, and started some
The
very unique.
Moravians and Lutherans.
Yeah,
There's
we had
a
the
lot.
Moravians, we had the Swedenborgians. They're still around. They're called the New Church now. The Brethren, the Mennonites, the Amish, the Baptists, very controversial.
Yeah.
um, we had Jewish people. We had a couple Muslims, not many. Of course, the Quakers, and the Lutherans, the evangelical Lutherans. I mean, it just goes
Mm.
on and on. It was so for people researching in Pennsylvania, you really have to know, and it's hard to determine it, but you have to figure this out, like what their religion was, because I can tell you they were pretty much only marrying within their own religion for a very long time. You didn't
Right.
cross,
Right. And then
into
that
other
church would have its
religions.
own
Yeah.
records of births and deaths and marriages that were performed. So
What?
interesting. I said that each of the
Yeah.
religious, the central organization for the religion would keep its own records and probably still does. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I
Hmm.
forgot about the Methodists. Yeah, they wrote up from Maryland.
All right. Well, I'm watching the time and we're kind of blowing past 20 minutes. So I think as much as we didn't talk at all about podcasting, what's the name of your website and the name of your podcast? Because we mentioned it, but we didn't really go deep on the podcast. So give me the names.
Yeah, so the podcast is Your Pennsylvania Ancestors. And I interview historians and archivists mostly about Pennsylvania history and where our records are in the genealogy records, because we do have things fairly dispersed for genealogists. And the website is PA Ancestors. And PA is the short way you say Pennsylvania, and a lot of us use it here. Um, but it's paancestors.com. Yeah. And yeah, check it out. I'd love for you to, if anyone's curious, I don't want to say almost everyone in the country has an ancestor in Pennsylvania, but we had a lot of very prolific Germans early on. So a lot of people,
If you go
and
several generations, yes.
yeah, and Scots Irish. So a lot of
Yeah.
people can trace at least one ancestor to Pennsylvania and immediately get stuck here. Like, why can't I find their
Yeah.
records?
Anything
And here I
beyond that,
am.
right? Yeah. All right, Denise. Well, as I said, everybody, it was a pleasure to get a chance to talk to you, and thanks for taking the time today.
Oh, it was great to talk to you too. Thanks for inviting me.